Good morning, everyone. My name is Benoit Menendez here. I'll be presenting how to use the remote.it GraphQL API. So I will assume that you're already familiar with APIs in general and maybe REST API in particular. And I also will assume that you're familiar with remote.it or our services, although, it will help you understand some of the schema that I will be presenting. I'll go over what GraphQL is. I'll go over the schema that we offer via GraphQL, but I'll spend the bulk of the webinar in a demonstration on how to build a device list, the query necessary to integrate remote.it within your application. Then I'll talk a little bit about future development in that area, and then we'll have a sizable Q&A if you have any questions. So what is GraphQL? GraphQL is a language for API. Basically, instead of calling pre-configured API calls that return a specific set of data, this enables you to make API calls that ask for exactly what you want. So in the back, we have an engine that is processing those queries and returning the information to you. One of the advantages of GraphQL, one of the many advantages of GraphQL, is that it is also self-describing. And I've posted a link to the GraphQL doc, which is a self-generated documentation. This is what it will show. You see what I mean? It self-documents itself, although albeit pretty simple documentation, but you will be able to look at the schema. You have a complete description of the data we're providing. This will let you basically ask for exactly what you need and nothing more, so you can optimize your bandwidth and make your application faster. The API also can evolve over time because all we need to do is extend the schema. There's no change to the API per se. There's a new API call. And there are a lot of tools out there to help with GraphQL. I'll present a few before the demonstration. So basically, GraphQL is the language and the runtime to access our schema. Schema at remote.it, I will be talking about that in particular. It allows seamless access to all our data we have in many databases, runtime data, metadata about the devices, state information, connection information, etc. It is a secure API. It needs an auth token, very similar to the REST API. And it has improved scalability over the REST API for large data set returning because of pagination. And with this, we'll be able to access basically all the information about your private cloud at remote.it, such as your user information, the devices and services you have at remote.it, some metadata and attributes of those devices and services, or sharing information, events and logging information such as connection and state change of your services, endpoint information, external IP address, and a lot of other information I'll show you, and connection information as well. This shows you a simple, this very simple query. On the left, you can see the syntax for a query. This shows for the login user, the one for which we have a token, we get the information about the user ID in the email. And you can see the responses on the right will return a JSON. This is a JSON exactly matching your request. So there's a login response with the ID and the email. This is a more elaborate query. It's showing through pagination a set of devices. We know we have 12 devices together, and for each device it shows the ID, the name, and the hardware ID. So this, I'll go over more detail in the demonstration, but this gives you an idea of you have a query, like it's the sequel of API, really. It's a query language. You ask for the data you want, you get the data back. So I'm going to spend the bulk of this webinar demoing how you can interactively design queries for GraphQL. There are several tools that support GraphQL out there. I've listed a few. Postman, I'm sure you're already familiar with for API design and testing. Postman as a GraphQL capability where you can use GraphQL API in addition to REST API. It is elaborated. It's a nice tool. GraphQL is the tool that you'll see referenced most on the internet because it's a free tool. It is easily integratable into other application or IDE. This tool is very basic, but actually very performing and very nice. The one I will use for this demonstration is called Insomnia. It's made by a company Kong in San Francisco here. And I think it's a notch up from GraphQL. It has additional capability. It's also very good user experience. And I will demo using Insomnia. And if you want to, there's a URL for a JSON that you'll be able to import in Insomnia in order to get the queries or queries that are similar to what I'll be presenting in this webinar. Obviously, there are a lot of other tools out there. Alter is one. I've used it once. It is very capable as well. And I'm sure if you look at your IDE, you will see that there is built-in support for GraphQL through some plugins. So it's pretty common now. For historical reference, GraphQL was done by Facebook quite a long time ago, now several years ago, and they decided to release it as an open source standard. So a lot of people have been building tools and building a schema for GraphQL out there. So this is Insomnia. The JSON I made available, and the reference is in the chat, will give you a list of queries you can look at there. I'm going to build one interactively, which makes more sense. You'll have a better understanding of the capability. But basically, this is the URL the GraphQL is at. It's at api.remoted beta GraphQL. Please use this to test. If you add /doc at the end, you'll get to that graph display in the browser there, if you put that in the URL of the browser. Most GraphQL queries are post, so I'll focus just on post query here. And the authentication needs a token authentication, same as the API. Please refer to our API documentation on how to obtain a token so you can execute your query as authenticated. So on this panel here in the middle, I will design the query, and on the right here, I will see the response to my query. So I'm going to start with a simple query. The top level query represents login. It represents the login user, the person whose token is referenced. So here I'm going to show the email attribute of my login. So if I execute this, I can see this is my email. I can ask for additional information. I can add, says, hey, I want to know, as you can see, I can do control space and get a whole bunch of suggestions of what would work here. What's my language? In case you didn't notice, it is English, albeit not that great, not primary, but I can ask for when my user was created. You see, I'm adding the created tag. And now I get the created date for my user account, which is a couple years ago. I can also ask when I last log in, that might be interesting. So you see here, already I modify and I rerun this query and I get additional data as needed. Well, we have a lot of information about users. I'll stop there, but because the primary purpose here is to access your device list. So I'm going to show you how to do that. One of the sub-elements under user is devices. So what I can ask about a device is going to be a paginated query. So I can ask for the total number of devices like that. It says I have 12 devices in my account. Well, it would be nice to show which one they are. So I can show the items that are selected, and I'm going to show, let's say, the device name for now. So those are the 12. Here it returned an array because this is returning an array of devices, and it shows you all my device name that I have in my account. So name, another thing I could ask for the ID. ID is our internal ID for devices. It allows, this is how you can, for example, call the REST API and ask for specific action, transfer, share, and connect, proxy connection with that ID. So this, I said it's pagination. For example, I can ask for just a small, let's say I have a small screen, I can only show 2 devices. I can say, show me just 2 devices, and I can, after that says, hey, I want that from the next 2 devices. So I say from size 2, it gives me the 3rd and 4th devices. So this shows you how you can paginate, and scroll over all your devices. What I can do also is I can filter for specific devices by name. For example, I want a device that has test in its name, so that will say, okay, I found this device called test pi. I can say, oh, show me only devices that are online, so I can state active, and I will filter. Whoops, you see, syntax error shows in red. The tool is really nice for designing GraphQL queries. So this shows you on the right all my active devices, or if you prefer, I can show my inactive devices. I have only one. Okay. So I'm going to go back to show my test device there. We're going to go into a little more detail. So I'm going to show the test device. So what can we say about device? I show the ID and the name, but we have a lot of data about device that we have access to. The primary one would be the state of a device, if it's active or not. You may want to show it here, in your device list. I'm going to make a little device list, and I want this information. And again, if I remove this, I would get that query executed for all my devices. I know the state, but I can also tell when it last reported, to our servers. So this shows you when is the last contact we had from the device. Remember, devices are staying online with ping intervals, and this is the last ping interval. There's plenty of device metadata that we can show. For example, the hardware ID of the device. I can show a category. Category A, B. Those categories are being filled up at time of registration. I can also show status fields, which are filled up by some sample script, bulk script you can run on your devices. So if I run this, you can see that they're not filled up for this one. Let me pick another device that has that filled up. I think I have an AWS device. Yeah, you can see this the AWS device was filled, its status A was filled by a bulk script and is available here. So this is useful if you want to query device-specific information and have your script save a specific bit of data. In that case, this is a uname response, save that into metadata of the device, and it can be visible in your device list. Let me see. One of the attribute of a device, I show you if it's online or not. So I'm gonna get rid of this to make more room. I'm gonna show you more attribute of the endpoint of the device. What we call an endpoint is its presence, where it is on the internet. So it has things like its external address, for example. I can tell you that my device here, maybe not the desktop one, it's at AWS. Let's go back to the test one. This one, its external address is, on this IP, and this is the port that's used for presence. This can be very useful for you to integrate in your application. Among other things, we can do geolocation based on this information. So geo, I can ask for more geo information. For example, what city is this device in? And this will basically use that IP address to find geolocation. This is in Petaluma. For the few that don't know where Petaluma is, for the many who don't know where Petaluma is, I can add state information, country information. So here I show state and country code. If the codes don't make sense for some people, we can also show state name and the country name, which are going to be more the name of the state and country in your language. There's quite a bit of information in the geo object, things from latitude, approximate latitude, and longitude. If you want to plot this in, on a map, you'll be able to have this information. So we are using this to locate, devices on maps. There are other information on the geo object, continent, country, ISP. This is based on the IP address. We look at databases to figure out which ISP this device is connected and which connection type as well. So if I run this, I can see that my device is using AT&T services, that's ISP, and this is a corporate connection type because it's I'm connecting to a private ISP that's not fully registered globally. But you could have information, you'd know if it was cellular, for example, if the device was connected on cellular. Okay, so this is very useful to present your devices on the map. You know, so I'll remove that because you can add that at any time. So that's the one device I have. So now a device in the remote.it schema can provide multiple services. So I want to know what kind of services are available on this device. So I'll put their name for now. It's easier to understand what I mean there. So this device, for example, has 3 services: an admin panel, an SSH endpoint, and a VNC endpoint. Okay, so those are, by the name, it would be kind of hard to really, you'd have to parse the name to know if it's SSH. So we added an application which gives you the type of application that's it. So 7 means web, 28 means SSH, 4 means VNC. How do I know this? Because there is another query you can ask called application types. And you can list all the application types. There is an ID, there's a name, and there's usually a default port for this. So if I run this, you see here, I'm returning 2 things. I'm returning the list of application type, which is listed here. And you can see that 7 is HTTP, 28 is SSH here, and and so on and so on. And after that, I have my login queries back here. So here, this is an example of running 2 queries within one request. So I'm going to remove that so you understand this. So now application is not really usable to present to the user. So we also offer something called the title. Bear with us with the names. It's a first iteration of a GraphQL API. We'll get better next time. They're very generic names. So the title is what you can present the user: HTTP, SSH, VNC. So now the user knows what endpoint is what. Another thing is we can tell what port it is available on the target. We can say that this admin panel is on 2999 on the target. This SSH port is on port 22, obviously, and VNC on 5900. So this gives you some information about the service. There's plenty more information about the service, when it was created and all that. Services also have endpoint with external address, hopefully the same as the device usually, but it also has other information. Mainly it's the same as the device most of the time. Service as a state as well, which by the way is part of the endpoint. So you can ask for the state here, active, but the state is like, this is a shortcut. It's the same as asking for what the endpoint state is. So I can write it that way as well. So this is the state. I can see that those 3 services are active. Sometimes the device can be active and some of the services not active, based on many reasons, or they could be disabled or something. This is how you access the endpoint of a device. And same as in device, you can still do the geolocation and say, where is that? More than likely, those services are in the same place as the device. Okay, I'll skip with this for the endpoint. Services. You can filter services. Let's say you wanted to make an SSH application and you don't want the other services. I just want the SSH services displayed. You can select here. You say, I want just the application 28, and this will only return the SSH service. This is useful to enumerate over all your devices for specific services and get the ID of the service. Let me add it. So now you know that this ID here that I have is what I should connect to connect to SSH. So here I can run this on all my devices, okay? So I get all my SSH services across all my devices. It would be nice if I could get instead of alphabetical, I could get sorted the most recent first. So you can actually sort by by, reverse created, for example, so that I would put the most recent, test by is my most recent device first. So there is a level of sorting. Not only is there filtering, but there is sorting as well. I can also filter by hardware ID. If you knew the hardware ID of the device, I can also filter by our hardware ID here. Give me all the device that have a hardware ID that contains, for example, a subset of the strings. Here, this was the UID is used as a hardware ID, but you can actually do infix. The same for name. If I want to search by name, I search for an infix of name. So I can search for EST, for example, and that would return test as well. This search actually looks at also the name of services. So if a service name, so if I do SSH, for example, it will return all devices that either have SSH in their name or SSH in one of the service names. So this is a little more elaborate. So sometimes you say, why did I, search for this and I got this desktop? Well, because this desktop has an SSH underneath. I'll go back to test, my test device. And now we're gonna show information about owner of the device and who the device is shared to. This is critical for authorization, for access. So let's see how that works. So a device, here in the device, I'm gonna add the owner of the device. I'm gonna show the email of the owner of the device. So here, I'm gonna run this, and I can see that the owner here, you see, is me, is my email address. Since I'm the owner, I can show information about who the device is shared with. And I can even do that at the service level. So I can say, hey, that service, who is it shared with? With what? Whoops, ignore that thing. Let's show me who is it shared with. All the emails of the people that have access. Right now, I don't have one, but if I picked another device, let's say that AWS desktop, let's pick that. This one, as you can see, is owned by me and shared to 2 other members of my team here. Good. So this shows how you can access who is sharing who. Now, if it's a device that I don't own, I think I do have a Jenkins, for example, or Jenkins server is a device I don't own. So I can see that it's owned by Robo and it doesn't have a SSH service. So let's look at all the other services on there. And you can see that all I see, I don't know who this owner shared this device to because I'm just one of the many sharee, but I know that it's shared with me. So this information is available. It's kind of important. Next, I should endpoint and geolocation. I think I'm actually moving pretty fast, so I hope it's not drowning you in information, but the flexibility is pretty powerful. So what I'm going to show you now is connection information, because I showed you now you can have the state information, state of your devices. It would be nice to know. So I'm going to go to the basic query. And again, you'll see there are examples on that JSON file if you want to import it into Insomnia. I use Insomnia Core, but I think this can be imported in Insomnia Designer as well. So they're both compatible. Make sure you get a token, and you should be able to run any of those examples on your data, obviously, not on mine. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect, off screen there using our desktop. I'm going to connect to a service out there with a peer-to-peer connection. So you didn't see it, but I'd like to know who, I'd like to have an API that knows my connection. So this is a peer-to-peer connection. In no way is that connection going through any of our server, but we established a connection. Therefore, we are able to report to you that you have done so. So let's ask for what session do I currently have. So session is a more complex object. We can go over the graph presentation, but a server as basically a session, as a timestamp, and it has a user who connected. Okay, that would be me because I'm asking for the one I've done, my initiator connection. It has a target, which is the target service, so I can show its name, for example. And it has an endpoint, which is where is that connection from. It may not be from my computer here. So from this endpoint, I can ask, for example, the external address and maybe some information about the city, you know, where the connection is from, which is different than the target, you know, as also an endpoint, and it has its own external address, you know, and it has its own GeoCity. So here, by the way, you can reformat here, you know, so it does a nice clean query. And after that, you can copy paste this and put it into your application, and it's a standard post to this URL. So Postman allows you to actually show bits of code based on the language you use on how to integrate GraphQL. Using, for example, in Node, you can use Axios, or you can use curl libraries, or you can do it from a shell prompt using curl. So here I'm going to execute this query that shows all my connections, the endpoint, the target endpoint, you know, where it is, and the source endpoint, you know, where I connected from and where it is. I'm running it, and oh, look at that! I have a connection to test by SSH, which I started right now on my side screen there. This is when it started at 15:30, so it's like 3 minutes ago. This is the target external address, you know, with its port from Petaluma and excuse me, to Petaluma. That's the target location, and this is the initiator connection. Slightly different port, same IP address because it's from my same network here. And also from Petaluma. But if I had connections from other places, I wouldn't know this information. So this is good to know all the connections you as a user made. But now, what about connections that other users are making to your devices? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the exact same thing, but I'm going to say, hey, for my device, test device, I want to know for the service, okay, sorry, so this is a pagination, so you have to add items. It will tell you if you make an error, you know, so for example, if I put something random in here and I run it, it will say, cannot query field blah blah on type device, you know. And it has support for, if I don't know what that is, I can click on it. With this tool, I get hover explaining quickly the types, that a device return a paginated device response, you know, and some one-line documentation, which is usually not sufficient, but, and then this is the detail on what the device's query is. Its return type, I can click on it and get more information. It has an item, which is an array of devices of all those attributes, you know, endpoint, last reported, name, owner, port, session, state, you know, all this information that I've demoed is available inline as built-in documentation. So let's go back to say, hey, I want to show the services whose application is 28, which is my SSH service. Let's first show the name to make sure I'm doing things right. Yeah, look at that, this. And I want to know who's connected to this. So I'm going to ask this as also a session attribute, and I want to know who is connected. So here I want to know the user who is connected, you know, since when. So there's a timestamp of the connection. And I may want to know where they connected from, just to get an idea, so I can show that maybe on the map. So I can ask for the endpoint of that connection and ask, make sure, user, and ask for the endpoint and add for external ID, for example. And again, geo, let's say I just care about the country name in here. You see autocomplete. Oops. Autocomplete more. Prettify, execute. There, so I say, hey, Benoit is connected from the United States to my device. You know, if I disconnect right now, I'm just going to disconnect on my side screen. You know, I'm going to refresh this, and you see my connection is gone. Okay, and if I want to show for all services on that device, all the connections, so I can see I have three services, none are connected to. Now on the side screen, I'm going to connect to VNC. There it is, I'm connected, I refresh. And now that I see that VNC as a connection. So this is super powerful. It's also instantaneous to get the data. Okay, I just disconnected and it's now gone. So what I've shown here is the ability to access the state of services, whether they're online or offline, and the connection, whether they're connected to right now or not connected to. What we would like to get is access to the logs. It would be nice to know, for example, what was the last connection done to this particular service. So I'm going to do again check for application SSH, the 28th. Application 28, but instead of the session, because right now I know there is no one really connected to it right now, disconnected, I'm going to not show the session part, but I'm going to show instead any kind of events, you know, actually events of type connect, you know, and for those events, I'm going to ask for the last 4 events because I'm not going to show you, I have a huge size. I'm going to ask for size 4, you know, last 4 events. Last 4 connection events to this service. So timestamp is when, sorry, this is also paginated, so you need an items. And for each event, I want, because there are so many that we had to paginate this particular query, I show the timestamp of the event. What else can I show about the event? Who did the connection? So the actor, we call it the actor of the event. Show its email. It would be nice to show a little bit about the target. The target is the devices, you know, or the services. Let's look at the services. The service name, you know, that connect. And then we need to show the state, which is because the same event is used for connect and disconnect. So here I'm going to show, again, you know, I'm familiar with this obviously, but, you know, it's really not that elaborate. Here for each connection, for the last 4 connection event, you know, show me the type of connection that was connect or disconnect, who did it, and to what's. The service is obvious, it's me, never mind. So this is kind of not really useful. But I can get other information like where was it? Well, I'll start with that for now, and I'll show you an extended syntax. So here you see my last 4 connection event. Let me make that a little bit bigger. Okay, so you can see there was a connect and a disconnect and a connect and a disconnect, you know. So I know who did it when. Okay. So now it would be nice to have additional information about the connection event. Like, for example, where was it from? Because we lost all track of the initiator. The initiator is long gone. So as the owner of the device, you have access to this information. Since events can have many form factors, here I'm going to use a special GraphQL syntax, which allows me to say when, and it's ... on. We say on a device connect event, you know, I'm going to add additional attributes because they are additional attribute to device connect event. So here I show what the attributes are, again, in the help. You know, I have the session ID. If somebody asks you, you know, internally, if we have to debug information, we can ask for the session. We have the external ID. That connection was done from, where is that? It's called source, excuse me, it's called source address. There is other information we know about the source. For example, what platform that was. This is a code internally. We know if it was a proxy connection. You know, and then we also have geo information. We can ask again, since we have the IP address, might as well say where it's from. So if I run this now, I'm going to say for my, not only disconnect doesn't have this information because the endpoint is gone, but on the connection event, you can see here that this was done from this source IP to the platform 4. So it's a peer-to-peer connection. Platform 4 means it's a MAC. So I know it's a MAC connection from this source IP from Petaluma to this, you know, on that at that time. So for auditing and information, this is super useful. And also to show a history, tracking, auditing. Good to know. You could query that anytime, show that into your UI. You know, you can also export it. So I can ask for this particular device, I can export. You just put events URL in here. I'm not going to limit 4 because you can see you cannot limit on the export. It will export them all. And here I say, give me the log of event connect. If I run this, This doesn't return an object. This will return the URL of a CSV file you can download for the purpose of getting those connection events. So here, if I execute this query, this gives me a URL back, a special URL containing your report. This URL is going to be valid for some amount of time, so it's meant for you to just grab and copy and do whatever you want. It has a UUID, so it's not guessable easily, and it doesn't live too long. But if I click on this, I can download CSV. I'll have the CSV of all my connections. What I can also do is I can ask for also device state information, so I can do the same for the device state. So device state is when the device came online and offline. This is useful for you to know, to check the, for example, the quality of your network connection, making sure to try to diagnose problem with network or devices when devices reboot or something like that, so you can check the state. So here, let me show you, if I get, I can ask for, again, this particular device, the timestamp, and then the state. And then here, if I run this, I know that this device, was inactive on that, active, inactive, active, inactive, active, I did reboot it a couple of times. We had some network, issues here. I'm in the country, so you can see when the device go on and offline. Based actually on devices going on and offline, we actually can calculate kind of a probability of availability of your service. So a service on the endpoint information here, I'm start to get into the more advanced data we show, but on the endpoint of this device, not only can I show what it currently, the state of the device as it currently is, here, device is active. I can show, I can evaluate an availability, which is a percentage, is how often is it online. This test device, which I'm using, on and on, sometimes it's off. Its average availability over the last day is 87%. So this might give you some indication whether this device is offline for a large amount of time. That may be cause for concern, and we track this carefully. We also track other metrics which are a little more, sophisticated and all that. I may not want to get over into that. So you've seen that demonstration. It basically show how easy it is to really develop really elaborate devices to integrate in your application, integrate the remote solution. This allows to navigate your cloud, your metadata, all your devices, and integrate that, and then use our REST API to act upon them. But eventually, we'd like to provide more functionality to GraphQL through what's called mutation, which are basically not just queries like I showed you, but also the ability to change the state of devices. For example, the ability to provision and register, add that to GraphQL. Other device management, and service management like sharing and transfer. Eventually, we'd like to have also a really a good integration with scripting as well within GraphQL as an alternative to the scripting API we have released there. GraphQL adds capability that we would like to leverage as well. For example, it would be nice to integrate a playground on our website, where people can type queries on sample devices or maybe connect to their account and then type queries to query their devices. I think that would be kind of useful to show that kind of interactivity I just showed you in this webinar. Have this available to you directly without you having to download Insomnia or GraphQL. GraphQL also allows notification for WebSockets or other means. We are planning to integrate this such that you can be notified immediately of connections and state changes of your devices. This is critical for integration of remote solution within your application. So you know right away when the device goes offline, for example, or when someone is connecting to your device and you can act upon it. So when is it available? Well, it's available now. I put in that one slide all the cool URLs I recommend you write down. One, if the endpoint for GraphQL, for GraphQL, which I've been demoing against there, is api.remoted/beta/GraphQL. Again, this is beta. Do not integrate that in production application. If you need to do that before we have a chance to go full public with this GraphQL API, let us know. We'll give you you a URL that is not a beta. We'll give you a production URL. The documentation, not great documentation at this time. I think we need to put a little more work into this, but I showed you the graph. If you go to GraphQL/doc, you'll have access to the graph of the schema that we make available. It's quite elaborate, and actually it's being added on continuously. This is the advantage. Without changing the API, versioning the API, we can add additional attributes on any one of those objects without affecting any existing application. What you saw, there was no star, in GraphQL, where you could say, give me all the attributes. This is a fundamental design choice. They don't want people to ask for everything. They want users or query designer, to just ask for the information they need. Also, a lot of the queries I did are available in this downloads.remoted/GraphQL/webinar.json. If you go to Insomnia, you can import. There's an import workspace, and you don't even have to download this. You can actually type that URL straight in there, and it will give you access to just about all the queries I've done. Of course, they're based on the names of my devices, so you're going to have to adapt to that, and you will have to specify a token in the headers, in the environment section. I just placed mine before this webinar, so you will have to do that. It's currently in preview. We would like to get a little longer beta period. Because of COVID, we had to delay the schema freeze a little bit because we were actually driving it. We had specific needs for some of our application. This is actually in use in our application. Our desktop application is using GraphQL to populate its device list and paginate it and all this. So it is production ready, but we still want to verify the schema before we publish it as an API tool. So I'm expecting general availability of this within a month or so. I have one question from Gary Worsham. Header info can be set in the web portal action menu correct at time of bulk registration CSV upload. So this is a correct statement. This is how you can pass category action. We're eventually going to evolve metadata into not just category A, B, C, D, E. We'll be providing the ability for application developer using the remoted cloud to use arbitrary metadata that they want to save, serial numbers, I don't know, a manufacturing date or whatever you want to add metadata, both at the user level for their user, also at the device level or service level. This is a list of resources available on our website, download page, documentation, forum, all that good stuff. Well, I hope that answered everything you wanted to know about our GraphQL API. I think GraphQL is, again, in summary, it's a very powerful new tool available to a remote integrator to put our private cloud solution within your application. So we use it internally. You should use it too. It's awesome. Thank you very much for participating, and we look forward to seeing you again on more webinar in our series. Thank you.